The Dominion had ruled the stars for 300 years. They had conquered 17 star systems and crushed every species that stood in their way. Their warships were massive things of metal and living tissue, grown as much as built, and their soldiers were bred for one purpose only: to kill. High Commander had led more conquests than he could remember, and each one had ended the same way. The enemy surrendered, the resources were taken, and the conquered species became slaves. When scouts detected radio signals coming from a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy, did not even bother to study the species living there. The signals were primitive, barely reaching past their own solar system. Whatever lived on that world would pose no threat. It would be another easy victory, another planet stripped of its metals and water, another species added to the long list of those who served the Dominion. The scout fleet arrived on a Tuesday morning. 12 enormous vessels appeared in the sky above Earth, blocking out the sun over cities across the world. People stopped in the streets and stared upward. Cars crashed as drivers lost focus. Phones buzzed with panicked messages. Within minutes, every news channel on the planet was showing the same images: alien ships hanging in the sky like dark clouds that would not move. They broadcast their message to every device capable of receiving it. The translation was rough but clear enough. Surrender all resources. Accept your place as a labor species within the Dominion. You have 48 hours to comply. Resistance will result in extinction. Governments around the world fell into chaos. Some leaders wanted to surrender immediately. Others wanted to fight, though they had no idea how. Emergency meetings were called in every capital city. Military commanders gathered to discuss options that did not exist. Nuclear weapons were prepared, but no one knew if they would even scratch the alien ships. Admiral Lisa Monroe was 57 years old and had served in the Navy for 35 years. She had commanded ships in 3 different wars and had seen more combat than most soldiers would see in 10 lifetimes. But nothing had prepared her for this. She sat in a bunker beneath Washington, surrounded by generals and politicians who looked to her for answers she did not have. The first day passed in arguments and fear. Some wanted to send a message of peace. Others wanted to launch everything they had at the alien ships before the deadline expired. Monroe listened to all of it, her mind working through possibilities that all ended the same way: defeat. On the second day, she made her decision. She stood before the United Nations Emergency Council, a room filled with the most powerful people on Earth, all of them looking at her with desperate eyes. She spoke clearly and without emotion, because emotion would not help them now. "We cannot win this war," she said. "Not today, not with what we have, but we can hurt them. We can make them bleed, and if we are going to die, we will die fighting. We will show them that humanity does not kneel." The transmission was sent to the fleet with 1 minute remaining before the deadline. High Commander received it on the bridge of his flagship. His translators converted the human words into something he could understand, and when he heard them, he laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the command center. His officers joined him, their sharp teeth showing in what passed for smiles among their kind. "They choose extinction," said. "Grant them their wish." The bombardment began at dawn over the Pacific Ocean. Plasma beams rained down from the sky, each one carrying enough energy to level a city block. Los Angeles was the first to burn, then Tokyo, then Sydney. Millions of people died in the first hour, their bodies turned to ash before they could even scream. But while the cities burned, something else was happening. In a secret facility in the Nevada desert, Captain Daniel was strapping himself into the pilot seat of an experimental spacecraft. The ship was called and it was the most advanced thing humanity had ever built. It was fast, it was agile, and it carried a weapon that no one was sure would work. Was 34 years old, with dark hair and calm eyes that never seemed to show fear. He had volunteered for this mission knowing that he would probably not survive. His crew of 12 had done the same. They were test pilots, Engineers and soldiers who had decided that dying in a desperate attack was better than dying on the ground while the world burned around them. The plan had come from Dr. Brooks, a software engineer who had spent her career writing code for farming equipment. When the aliens arrived, she had been pulled into a secret government program and given an impossible task: find a weakness in the alien technology. She had worked for 36 hours without sleep, studying every scrap of data they had collected from the alien transmissions. What she found was simple but promising. The ships relied on complex computer systems to aim their weapons. If those systems could be disrupted, even for a few minutes, the ships would be vulnerable. And the best way to disrupt them was an electromagnetic pulse, the kind created by a nuclear explosion in space. The plan was insane. Fly close to the alien fleet, detonate nuclear weapons to create the pulse, and then upload a computer virus that Brooks had written in less than 2 days. The virus was crude and ugly, held together with desperate hope, but it was their only chance. Launch the while plasma fire still rained on the cities below. He flew through the chaos, using the smoke and debris as cover, climbing higher and higher until the blue sky turned black and the stars appeared. His crew worked in silence, each one focused on their task, each one knowing that the next few minutes would decide the fate of their species. They did not notice the small human ship until it was too close to stop, gave the order, and 3 nuclear missiles launched from this hull. They detonated in a triangle pattern around the alien fleet, creating a wave of electromagnetic energy that swept through the ships like a storm. 3 of the 12 ships went dark. Their lights flickered and died. Their weapons stopped firing. One of them, caught without power to maintain its orbit, began to fall toward Earth. It entered the atmosphere and burned, a streak of fire across the sky, before crashing into the Pacific Ocean. The impact sent waves rolling across the water, flooding coastlines that had already suffered so much. On his bridge, High Commander stared at his displays in disbelief. One of his ships was gone, 2 more were crippled, and the primitive species he had dismissed as harmless was responsible. He ordered a retreat. His fleet pulled back to the edge of the solar system to repair and regroup. It was meant to be temporary, a brief pause before the final destruction of Earth. On the ground, humanity allowed itself one moment of celebration. They had won a battle, but Admiral Monroe knew better than to think the war was over. She gathered her commanders and spoke the words that would define the months ahead. They will come back, and when they do, we need to be ready. We have bought ourselves time with blood. Now we use that time. We learn, we build, we prepare. Because next time we will not just survive. Next time we will win. The work began immediately. Humanity had been given a chance, and they would not waste it. The weeks after the first battle were filled with grief and determination. The death toll was beyond anything humanity had ever experienced. Entire cities had been reduced to glass and ash. Families searched for loved ones who would never be found. The world mourned, but it did not stop moving. Admiral Lisa Monroe understood something that many leaders did not. Grief was natural, but paralysis was death. She pushed governments to act, to set aside old hatreds and work together. For the first time in human history, every nation on Earth agreed to unite under a single military command. There were arguments, of course. There were politicians who wanted power and generals who distrusted their counterparts from other countries. But Monroe had a way of cutting through nonsense. She showed them images of the burned cities and asked a simple question: do you want to argue, or do you want to survive? The factories of the world changed their purpose. Plants that had built cars began building weapons. Shipyards that had constructed cruise liners began constructing warships. Scientists who had spent their lives studying peaceful things like stars and molecules now turned their minds to destruction. It was ugly work, but necessary. Dr. Brooks found herself at the center of this transformation. Her virus had crippled 3 alien ships, and now everyone wanted her to do more. She was given a team of the best programmers on Earth, and told to find new weaknesses in technology. She worked 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in her laboratory, eating meals she did not taste. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her like a physical thing. But the real breakthrough came from Dr. Samuel Price. Price was a physicist, 62 years old, with wild hair and eyes that always seemed to be looking at something no one else could see. Before the invasion, he had been considered a bit strange even by the standards of his profession. He studied theoretical concepts that most scientists thought were impossible: faster-than-light travel, wormholes, the bending of space itself. When the ship crashed into the Pacific, Price was one of the first scientists sent to examine the wreckage. He spent weeks in a pressurized suit, walking through flooded corridors filled with alien bodies and broken machinery. Most scientists focused on the weapons systems or the communication equipment. Price was interested in something else: the engines. They could travel between stars in days rather than years. This meant they had solved the problem of faster-than-light travel, something human scientists had only dreamed about. Price found the remains of the ship's drive system and began to study it with an intensity that worried his colleagues. He barely spoke for 2 months. He filled notebooks with equations that no one else could understand. He built small models and tested them in controlled explosions that sometimes knocked out power to the entire research facility. But slowly, piece by piece, he began to understand how it worked. The drive bent space around a ship, creating a bubble that allowed it to move faster than light without actually accelerating. Human physicists had theorized about such things for decades, but they had never been able to make it work. The alien wreckage gave Price something no theory could provide: proof that it was possible. 4 months after the first battle, Price called Admiral Monroe to his laboratory. He was thinner than before, his clothes hanging loose on his frame, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "I can build one," he said. "A faster-than-light drive. It will be rough, it will be dangerous, but it will work." Monroe looked at the equations on his screens, understanding none of them. "How long?" "2 months if you give me everything I need. 3 if there are problems." She gave him everything he needed. While Price worked on the drive, the rest of humanity prepared for the return of the Captain Daniel, now promoted to commander, trained new pilots using the data gathered from the first battle. He taught them how the alien ships moved, where their blind spots were, how to avoid their weapons' fire. The classes were brutal, and many students washed out, but those who remained became the best pilots humanity had ever produced. Dr. Brooks developed new viruses, each one more sophisticated than the last. She also created defensive programs to protect human systems from counterattacks. Her team worked around the clock, and slowly they built a digital arsenal that could match anything the aliens had. The world held its breath and waited. 6 months after the first attack, the returned. High Commander had not been idle during his retreat. He had studied the human attack, analyzed their tactics, and developed countermeasures. His ships now had shielding that could resist electromagnetic pulses. His computer systems were hardened against viral attacks. He brought a fleet 3 times the size of the first one, 36 warships armed with weapons that could crack a planet in half. He expected to find a broken species waiting for death. What he found was something else entirely. As the fleet approached Earth, 3 small objects detached from a space station orbiting the moon. They were ships, but unlike any ships humanity had built before. They were sleek and angular, covered in panels that hummed with energy. Commander sat in the pilot seat of the lead ship, which had been named Valor. Beside him flew Defiance and Hope, crewed by men and women who had volunteered for a mission that should have been suicide. "All ships prepare to jump," said into his radio. The alien fleet saw the human ships and opened fire. Plasma beams streaked across space, aimed at the tiny vessels that dared to challenge them. And then the human ships vanished. They reappeared behind the fleet, in the space between the enemy ships where no weapons were aimed. For 3 precious seconds, the aliens could not react. They had never seen a primitive species use faster-than-light travel. It was impossible, and yet it was happening. Gave the order to fire. The human ships carried new weapons, designed from the ground up to hurt vessels. Missiles that released clouds of metal fragments at high speed, shredding armor and puncturing hulls. Energy beams reverse-engineered from alien technology, crude but effective. The attack lasted less than a minute, but in that minute, 8 warships were destroyed. The alien fleet scattered in confusion. Commanders screamed orders that their crews could not follow. Ships crashed into each other trying to turn and face a threat they did not understand. Admiral Monroe watched from Earth, her hands gripping the edge of a control console. She had gambled everything on this moment. Price's drives, Brooks's weapons, courage. If any of them had failed, humanity would have died today. They did not fail. High Commander retreated for the second time, his fleet reduced by nearly a quarter. As he fled to the edge of the solar system, he sent an urgent message to the Dominion. His words would change the course of galactic history. The humans are no longer prey. They have learned to jump between stars. They have learned to fight. If we do not destroy them now, they will become a threat to everything we have built. On Earth, humanity celebrated their victory. But Admiral Monroe did not join the celebrations. She stood alone in her office, looking up at the stars, knowing that the real war was just beginning. "They will come back with more ships," she said to no one. "And we will need to be stronger. We cannot just defend anymore. We need to take the fight to them." It was time for humanity to go on the offensive. The year that followed the second battle was the busiest in human history. Every resource, every mind, every pair of hands was put to work building a fleet that could challenge the Dominion. Shipyards operated day and night. Mines dug deeper than ever before. Schools trained a new generation of soldiers, pilots, and engineers who had grown up watching their cities burn and were determined to make sure it never happened again. Admiral Lisa Monroe oversaw all of it from a command center built deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. She slept 4 hours a night and spent the rest of her time reviewing reports, approving designs, and pushing her people to work faster. She knew that somewhere out there, they were doing the same thing. The next battle would decide everything. Dr. Samuel Price continued to improve his faster-than-light drive. The first version had been dangerous and unreliable, capable of only short jumps. The second version was better. The third was better still. By the end of the year, human ships could travel from Earth to the edge of the solar system in minutes, and they could make the journey without shaking themselves apart. Dr. Brooks turned her attention from viruses to strategy. She had a gift for seeing patterns that others missed, and she began developing tactical programs that could predict enemy movements. Her algorithms were not perfect, but they gave human commanders an edge they desperately needed. Commander Daniel spent his time training pilots and testing new ship designs. He flew every prototype that came off the production line, pushing each one to its limits and reporting back on what worked and what did not. He crashed 3 times and survived each crash through a combination of skill and luck. The 4th prototype was nearly perfect, and it became the template for the ships that would carry humanity to the stars. But perhaps the most important development came from an unexpected source. Signals began arriving from beyond the solar system. At first, the technicians who detected them thought they were echoes or errors. But as the signals grew clearer, their meaning became obvious. Someone was trying to talk to Earth. The messages came from a species called a peaceful civilization that had been conquered by the 2 centuries ago. They lived as servants now, building ships and growing food for their masters. But they had not forgotten their freedom, and they had been watching humanity's resistance with growing hope. They offered information, star charts showing territory, details about their fleet movements and supply lines, weaknesses in their technology that even human scientists had not discovered. In return, they asked for only one thing: liberation. Monroe accepted without hesitation. If other species were willing to help humanity fight, she would not turn them away. Over the following months, more signals arrived from other conquered species. They who had been enslaved even longer than a warrior species whose rebellion had been crushed but whose spirit had not been broken. The scientists who had been forced to build weapons for their conquerors but who had secretly sabotaged their work whenever possible. They had made many enemies over the centuries. Now those enemies were reaching out to the one species that had dared to fight back and win. Admiral Monroe called a meeting of her senior staff to discuss their next move. They gathered in a conference room deep underground, surrounded by screens showing the positions of enemy fleets and the locations of potential allies. "We have two options," Monroe said. "We can stay here and wait for them to come to us again, build our defenses and hope they are strong enough, or we can take the war to them, strike their supply lines, free their slave species, force them to fight on multiple fronts." Commander was the first to speak. "If we wait, they will just build a bigger fleet. We surprised them twice. They will not let it happen a third time. We need to keep them off balance." Dr. Brooks nodded in agreement. "The information from our new allies gives us targets, outposts that are lightly defended, supply stations that fuel their entire war machine. If we hit them there, we can slow them down while we build up our own strength." Dr. Price looked less certain. "Our ships are still new. We do not know how they will perform in extended operations far from Earth. There are risks." Monroe considered his words carefully. Price was right. The risks were real, but the risks of doing nothing were worse. "We attack," she said. "In 2 weeks we launch our first offensive operation. Target Outpost 7. It is a supply station at the edge of their territory, lightly defended according to intelligence. We take it and we send a message to every species in the galaxy. Humanity is not just surviving. Humanity is coming." The 2 weeks passed quickly. Ships were loaded with weapons and supplies. Crews drilled constantly, practicing every possible situation they might face. Nervous energy filled the fleet like electricity before a storm. Commander would lead the attack from his ship, now renamed Relentless. He had handpicked his crew from the best pilots and soldiers Earth had to offer. They were young, most of them born after the first invasion. They had grown up in a world at war, and they were ready to fight. On the day of departure, Admiral Monroe came to see them off. She walked through the hangar where the ships waited, their hulls gleaming under artificial lights. She stopped to speak with each crew, offering words of encouragement and thanks. When she reached, she paused. "Bring them home," she said quietly. Met her eyes. "I will bring as many home as I can. But we both know some of us will not return. That is the price of war." Monroe nodded. She had paid that price many times in her career. It never got easier. The fleet launched at exactly midnight. 47 ships jumped into faster-than-light travel, leaving Earth behind. The journey to Outpost 7 would take 3 days. 3 days of waiting, of preparing, of hopping. When they arrived, they were not expecting them. The battle was fierce but short. Human ships struck from multiple directions at once, using tactics that the aliens had never encountered. They ambushed patrols, drew defenders out of position, and then hit the station with everything they had. The outpost fell in 18 hours. Humanity had captured its first alien territory. As the last soldiers surrendered, stood on the command deck of the station and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, other species were watching. Other species who had lived under rule for centuries were seeing proof that the invaders could be beaten. He activated a communication channel that would broadcast across the sector. His message was simple. "This is Commander Daniel of the Earth Fleet. Outpost 7 is now under human control. To any species listening, know this: we are fighting back, and we are winning. Join us." The responses began arriving within hours. Ships bearing flags of rebellion jumped into the system. Warriors from a dozen species volunteered to fight alongside humanity. The alliance that would eventually bring down the Dominion had begun. And on the High Commander received the news of the outpost's fall with cold fury. The humans were no longer content to defend their world. They were attacking. They were spreading like a disease through his territory. He went before the Dominion Council and made a request that had never been made in history. He asked for every ship in the Empire, every soldier, every weapon. He would gather a fleet so large that no enemy could stand against it. He would go to Earth itself and burn it to nothing. The final battle was coming. 2 years had passed since the first ships appeared in Earth's sky. In that time, humanity had transformed from a species that had barely touched its own moon into a force that was reshaping the galaxy. The fleet had grown from 3 experimental ships to nearly 200 vessels of various sizes and capabilities. Allies from 12 different species had joined the cause, bringing their own ships, their own soldiers, and their own burning desire for freedom. Admiral Lisa Monroe commanded it all from her headquarters beneath the mountains. She had aged visibly in those 2 years. Her hair had gone completely, and lines had deepened on her face. But her eyes were still sharp, and her mind was still the quickest in any room she entered. The war had not been easy. For every victory there had been losses, ships destroyed, crews killed, entire outposts wiped out before help could arrive. Monroe kept a list of every person who had died under her command, and she read it every night before she slept. She owed them that much. But the victories had been real. 12 outposts had been captured or destroyed. 3 major supply lines had been cut. Millions of slaves from conquered species had been freed, and many had joined the fight. The Dominion was bleeding, and for the first time in their long history, they were afraid. Commander Cole had become one of the most celebrated officers in the fleet. She was 29 years old now, with short dark hair and a scar on her chin from a battle that had nearly killed her. Before the war, she had been an airline pilot, flying passengers between cities on boring routine flights. Now she commanded a destroyer called the Relentless and had personally led attacks on 4 enemy installations. Cole was not naturally suited to war. She did not enjoy killing, and she had nightmares about the things she had seen. But she had a gift for tactics that surprised even herself. She could look at a battlefield and see opportunities that others missed. She understood how to use speed and surprise to defeat enemies that should have been stronger than her. Dr. Brooks had become something unexpected, a war strategist. Her background in software and pattern recognition had evolved into something more. She developed a system that analyzed movements and predicted their responses to human attacks. The system was not perfect, but it was right more often than it was wrong, and that edge had saved thousands of lives. Dr. Samuel Price continued to improve the technology that made human expansion possible. His drives were now reliable enough for civilian ships to use, and a network of human colonies had begun to spread across nearby star systems. He was also working on new weapons, though he did not enjoy that work. Price was a scientist at heart, more interested in understanding the universe than in destroying things. But he understood that some things needed to be destroyed before peace was possible. Commander Daniel had become a legend. He had fought in more battles than anyone else in the fleet and had survived things that should have killed him a dozen times. Younger pilots spoke his name with awe and tried to copy his flying style. He accepted the attention with uncomfortable grace, always pointing out that he had not won alone, that every victory belonged to his crews and his allies. The alliance had grown beyond anything Monroe had imagined. They provided intelligence and technical support. They contributed ground troops who fought with a ferocity born from centuries of oppression. They sent their remaining warriors, proud soldiers who had been waiting for this chance since their own rebellion was crushed. They shared scientific knowledge that accelerated human technology by decades. But they were not defeated yet. High Commander had spent 2 years gathering the largest fleet in Dominion history. 400 warships, each one crewed by soldiers who had been bred for combat. The fleet was armed with weapons that could shatter moons and shields that could withstand anything humanity had thrown at them before. Had been given one order by the Dominion Council: destroy Earth and end the human threat forever. He intended to obey. Human intelligence networks detected the fleet as it began to move. Messages flew across the Alliance, warning of the coming storm. Ships were recalled from patrol routes. Colonies were evacuated. Everyone who could fight was called to defend the. Monroe gathered her commanders for a final briefing. The conference room was crowded with faces from a dozen species, all of them looking to her for guidance. 400 ships, she said, bringing up a display that showed the enemy fleet. That is what is coming for us. We have 300 including our allies. We are end. Silence filled the room. The numbers were clear. Even with everything they had built, the odds were against them. But we have something they do not, Monroe continued. We have been fighting together for 2 years. We know each other. We trust each other. The fleet is made up of crews who have never worked together, commanded by an officer who has never faced a real challenge. They expect us to run or to die easily. We will do neither. She outlined her plan. The human and allied fleets would not meet in open battle. Instead, they would use the solar system itself as a weapon. Ships would be hidden among moons and asteroid fields. Traps would be laid in predictable approach paths. The enemy would be led into a killing ground where their numbers would mean less. We cannot win by strength alone, Monroe said. So we will win by being smarter, faster, and more determined. We will make them pay for every kilometer they advance. And when they think they have won, when they think Earth is defenseless, we will show them what humanity really is. The commanders left to prepare their ships. Cole went to the Relentless and spoke to her crew, telling them what was coming, gathered his pilots for one final training session. Brooks ran her prediction systems over and over, looking for any advantage she might have missed. And then the waiting began. The fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system 3 days later. They came in a formation designed to overwhelm any defense, a wall of warships that blotted out the stars behind them. High Commander stood on his bridge and looked at the screens that showed his destination, a small blue planet that had caused him more trouble than the rest of the galaxy combined. Begin the advance, he ordered. Destroy anything that moves. The fleet pushed forward, weapons ready, confident in their overwhelming force. They did not see the traps waiting for them in the darkness. They did not see the Allied ships hidden among the moons of Jupiter, or the weapons platforms concealed in the asteroid belt, or the small strike craft lurking in the shadows of Saturn's rings. They did not see Commander Cole watching from the bridge of the Relentless, her hands steady on the control panel, waiting for the signal to attack. They did not see Admiral Monroe in her command center, surrounded by screens that showed every ship in her fleet, every trap she had laid, every piece of a plan 2 years in the making. They saw only Earth, defenseless and waiting to burn. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Monroe watched the enemy fleet cross the invisible line she had drawn on her tactical display. They were committed now, too deep in the system to retreat quickly. She opened a channel to every ship in her command. Her voice was calm and steady, the voice of a commander who had already accepted whatever the next hours would bring. All ships, this is Admiral Monroe. The enemy is in position. Execute Operation Homecoming. Give them a fight they will never forget. The darkness of space exploded into light and fire as the final battle began. The first wave of attacks came from the asteroid belt. Hidden weapons platforms opened fire on the fleet, sending missiles and energy beams into their formation from angles they had not expected. Ships exploded before their crews even understood they were under attack. The neat lines of the Dominion fleet began to break apart as commanders tried to respond to threats from multiple directions. High Commander screamed orders from his bridge, but the chaos was spreading faster than his words could reach. His sensors showed enemies everywhere and nowhere. Every shadow might hide an attacker. Every piece of debris might be a bomb. This was exactly what Admiral Monroe had planned. Commander Daniel led the first strike group out of hiding behind one of Jupiter's moons. His pilots followed him in tight formation, their ships moving as one unit through the confusion of the battlefield. They hit a carrier from below, where the shields were weakest, and tore it apart with concentrated fire. "Stay together," said over the radio. "Pick your targets and do not stop moving. The moment you stop, you die." On the other side of the battle, Commander Cole brought the Relentless through a gap in the enemy formation. Her ship was not the largest in the fleet, but she handled it like a fighter craft, dancing between plasma beams and return fire. Her crew worked in perfect coordination, each person knowing their role without needing to be told. They tried to reform their lines, but every time they began to organize, another attack came from a different direction. Human ships appeared from behind moons, launched strikes, and vanished again before the enemy could respond. Allied vessels from a dozen species fought alongside them, each one bringing their own tactics and skills to the battle. They used small, fast ships that were almost impossible to track. They slipped between the larger vessels and planted explosives on engine systems, crippling ships without destroying them. The ground troops boarded disabled enemy vessels and fought hand-to-hand in the corridors, clearing them deck by deck with brutal efficiency. The warriors flew their ships directly into the enemy formation, accepting damage to their own vessels in exchange for the chance to strike killing blows. They had waited centuries for this fight, and they were not going to hold back now. Dr. Brooks watched the battle from the command center, her screens showing the flow of ships and weapons across the solar system. She fed information to the commanders in real time, identifying weak points in the enemy formation and predicting movements before they happened. "Cole, 3 destroyers are moving to flank your position. Break left and you will have a clear shot at their flagship." Cole heard the warning and acted instantly. The Relentless turned hard, its engines straining, and found itself facing the massive command ship, where High Commander stood watching his fleet fall apart. "All weapons target that ship," Cole ordered. "Everything we have." The Relentless opened fire. Missiles streamed across the gap between the two vessels. Energy beams carved lines of destruction across the enemy hull. The flagship shuddered under the assault, its shields flickering. But the flagship was not defenseless. Return fire smashed into the Relentless, tearing through armor and systems. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Crew members fell at their stations. Cole felt her vessel dying around her, but she did not stop firing. Saw what was happening and brought his strike group to help. They hit the flagship from behind, pouring fire into its engines. The massive ship began to drift, its power failing. High Commander looked at the damage reports on his screens and understood that he had lost. His fleet was being torn apart around him. His flagship was crippled. Everything he had built, everything the Dominion had achieved in 3 centuries of conquest, was crumbling in the face of a species that should have been easy prey. He could not accept it. He refused to accept it. "Prepare boarding parties," he ordered. "We will take their command center. We will kill their leaders with our own hands." His officers looked at him with something approaching fear. The battle was lost. They should retreat, save what ships they could, but was beyond reason now. His pride demanded blood. The shuttle carrying and his elite guards launched from the dying flagship. It flew through the chaos of the battlefield, dodging debris and weapons fire, heading for Earth. Behind him, the remains of his fleet tried to follow, but human and allied ships cut them apart piece by piece. Admiral Monroe received the warning that an enemy shuttle was approaching Earth. She watched it on her screens, tracking its path, knowing what was coming. "He is coming here," she said quietly. "He wants to end this personally." She could have ordered the shuttle destroyed. A single missile would have ended the threat. But Monroe understood something about war that went beyond tactics and weapons. Some things needed to be settled face to face. "Let him land," she said. "I will meet him myself." Her staff protested, but she silenced them with a look. She had spent 2 years sending others to fight and die. Now it was her turn to face the enemy directly. And his guards landed near the entrance to the command bunker. They fought their way through the first line of defenders, their enhanced bodies and advanced weapons cutting down the human soldiers who tried to stop them. But each step cost them. Guards fell to traps and ambushes. By the time reached the command center, only 3 of his soldiers remained. Monroe was waiting for him. She stood in the center of the room, alone, a weapon in her hand. Around her, screens showed the final moments of the battle above. The fleet was breaking. Ships were surrendering. The war was ending. Looked at the screens and then at the human woman who had orchestrated his defeat. She was small compared to him, old by human standards, with hair and tired eyes. But she did not look afraid. "You have destroyed everything," he said, his translator turning the words into something she could understand. 3 centuries of conquest, an empire that stretched across the stars, all of it ruined by primitives. Monroe nodded slowly. "Yes." How did you do this? You were nothing, you had nothing." Monroe considered the question carefully before answering. "We had something you never understood. We had each other. We had allies who believed in us. We had people who were willing to die for something bigger than themselves. You had an empire built on fear and slavery. When that fear broke, you had nothing left." Raised his weapon, but Monroe was faster. She fired twice and 2 of his guards fell. The third charged at her, and she met him with a blade she had carried since her first command. The soldier was stronger than her, but she was smarter. She used his momentum against him, let him overextend, and put the blade through his neck. Then she faced alone. The High Commander looked at his fallen soldiers, at this human who had killed them, and felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. His whole life he had believed that strength was all that mattered. The strong conquered the weak. The powerful ruled the powerless. It was the natural order of things. But this woman had beaten him. Her species had beaten him. And they had done it not through strength alone, but through something else. Something he did not have words for. "Surrender," Monroe said. "It is over. Your fleet is destroyed. Your empire is falling. You can die here alone and forgotten, or you can live and maybe learn something from what happened today." Stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. Above Earth, the last ships stopped fighting. One by one they broadcast signals of surrender. The battle was over. The war was won. In the months that followed, the galaxy changed. The Dominion collapsed as species they had conquered rose up to claim their freedom. New governments formed. New alliances took shape. Humanity found itself at the center of a changing universe, respected and feared in equal measure. Admiral Lisa Monroe retired a year after the final battle. She went back to Montana, to the mountains where she had grown up, and spent her days in peace. Sometimes she looked up at the stars and thought about everything that had happened. The millions who had died. The billions who had been saved. The choice she had made when the aliens first arrived. She had said that humanity would not kneel. She had been right. The Galactic Council invited humanity to join as full members. Other species welcomed them, some with gratitude for their liberation, others with wariness about what this new power might become. But all of them understood one truth that would echo through history for generations to come. They had thought humanity was easy prey. They had attacked without warning, expecting quick surrender and easy conquest. They had learned fast how wrong they were. And the galaxy would never make that mistake again.